From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. One cat died. 3 farmers had pink eye. Some chickens tested positive from the PCR test, and millions of chickens have been slaughtered to ostensibly prevent contagion. What is going on? This is episode 490, and our guest today is Jacob Diaz. Jacob is an independent researcher investigating contagion, viruses, and all things related to bioterrain and well-being. Jacob explains today what happened in the 2000s with so-called outbreaks of bird flu, and he offers his perspective on how the whole concept of bird flu is a tool to influence the public away from real food and to create dependence on big food and big pharma. He goes over the literature to make his case, literature that indicates that the flu is not a foodborne pathogen and that contagion from animal to animal, or even animal to people, is very rare, if not completely impossible. He also reviews bird flu symptoms and what he suspects is actually at the root cause of the concerns. He lays it all out in candid fashion today and reminds us that taking our health into our own hands keeps us independent and healthy, something that is threatening to political and corporate interests. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to the Wise Traditions Conference in Orlando this October. Join us. It is going to be a marvelous event, a gathering focused around real nourishing food and nourishing talks from speakers like Dr. Stephen Hussey, Manal Ballester, Sophia Eng, and longtime favorites like Dr. Tom Cowan and Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, with many more. Together, we'll enjoy Wise Traditions-friendly food, benefit from the wisdom shared from the stage, and the friendships made in the convivial atmosphere. So join us. Go to wisetraditions.org now to reserve your place and get your tickets today. I hope to see you there October 25th to the 27th in Orlando, Florida. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Jacob.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
This bird flu thing is all over the news, and some people are up in arms. I am so curious. We're going to start from square one. I heard that there were some cats or a cat that died that got the bird flu. And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? Take it from the top.
When you go to the authority statements, even they say that animal to animal transmission is particularly rare and hard to really prove. And this was done years ago. They did studies and they really failed. They had several cats in a farm that drank some raw milk from a cow that supposedly had bird flu, and it had neurological symptoms and died. That's it. No real evidence to suggest anything was actually there in the milk. They obviously test with PCR, which we know how fallacious PCR is. So we don't really know what was in the cow's milk. For all we know, the cow was being fed something garbage, and all that trash was in the milk, and it poisoned the cow. Oh, not the cow, the cat. It happens, all poisons in a mammal will be in its milk. But again, no real evidence to suggest that it was any virus. And like, as I said off screen, with these raw milk false testimonials of how poisonous they are and how horrible it is, there's never real any evidence. There's nothing. It's usually governmental agencies that have a false report. They'll go into these raw milk farms, they'll rate it without any real evidence to suggest anything's happening there. So when I read this story about cats, it didn't seem very logical and rational to me. So it looked like it was more of a hit piece than anything. But even if something did happen with the cat, it's not the bird flu. And we'll get into that now.
Yeah. Talk to us about what is the premise out there about bird flu?
So the belief essentially is that these birds, specifically in factory farms, which is a huge clue as to what's happening, get sick, right? So we know that if you feed a human garbage food and you bombard them with LED lights and you don't have them go outside, that a human will get sick. So what makes you think that a tiny 4-pound bird wouldn't get sick from the same exact environment? So with the bird flu, the authorities will claim that it's a sort of influenza that attaches whatever virology terms you want to the bird, infects it, and can be spread to other animals via the feces specifically, or the urine or the spit. And the symptoms are kind of very non-specific. So you have ruffled fur, you have neurological pathologies, you have gastrointestinal issues, you have the eggs that are very weak. So the eggs come out kind of like thin and not very nutritious. It's just a lot of different symptoms that they want to claim that this virus, that honestly it's hard to find is actually real, causes these symptoms. And so what they'll do is they'll use PCR to test these chickens, and that these chickens are not eating a proper diet. They're eating GMO corn. They're highly inbred, so their bodies are not very structured properly. They're very fat. They're eating the feces and being exposed to all the waste in these farms. And they get sick. Obviously, they get sick. It's pretty logical.
These concentrated animal feeding operations, I've seen videos of workers coming into the hoop house or whatever it is, and they're wearing hazmat suits.
Exactly.
Because it's such an unsanitary, it's such a poor habitable or inhabitable kind of place.
Exactly. So it's not a surprising thing that some of the birds will have green diarrhea, a fever, or discharge from the eyes, because all of that waste is being breathed right into the respiratory system. So if they develop a cough, they'll be like, oh my God, bird has bird flu. This chicken needs to be tested. And then when they test the bird, then comes the culling, which leads to millions of birds dying for absolutely nothing.
Well, speaking of culling, so I've heard of some actually farms that practice regenerative farming practices. They have their animals out in pasture. The chickens have some free range situation. So how could officials come in and cull their chickens if they're not in the conditions you're describing?
So a lot of these farms will maybe 1, 2, or a couple dozen or whatnot chickens may test positive. The surrounding farms will also be affected. It's a kind of a form of like a contact tracing like they did with COVID. You were near somebody, so now you're at risk, or now you're at risk. Even though, based on their own literature, the transmission and pathogenicity is very, very rare. So if one farm has a couple of chickens that test positive, now another farm that's 6 miles away is also going to get people coming in there testing their chickens. And inevitably, since PCR is very easy to manipulate, you'll get positives. So what I'm seeing with my research and others, most of these regenerative farms that are pasture-raised, free-range chickens, they're not sick at all. They're healthy. The meat is actually very nutritious as well. It's the factory-raised chickens that are getting sick left and right. And that is the whole terrain of it. You treat these chickens like trash, you feed them trash, they're not living properly, they'll get sick. And now you want to blame a virus over the environment that you gave the chickens.
But if they've had these CAFOs for a while, why is there a sudden concern? Like maybe these animals have been kind of sickly for a while. So how come all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, this is bird flu?
Because they love their yearly pandemics. That's what they like to do. We just got over COVID. I mean, COVID supposedly ended in 2023. And now we have to push more towards that, not to go more conspiratorial, but that push for 2030 agenda, the controlling of the food supply. They want to control the vegetables and produce, so they spray it constantly with these GMO feeds and fungicides, herbicides. They do the same thing with the meat. They want to make lab-grown meat. They want to stop you from drinking raw milk. They want to control all of the food supply. So how do they do that? They scare you away from the meat. They scare you away from the raw milk. Now let's eat the blended bugs that we have, or let's eat the lab-grown meat or the soy meat, whatever you want, because we can control that. Because farmers that are actually treating their animals with respect, the way that they're supposed to be treated, and providing natural, healthy food are a threat to the system. And bird flu is a perfect way to bring that control onto them.
So let's go back to the puzzle pieces that they're putting together to say there's an issue with bird flu. So one was this cat that died. One was a farmer with pink eye. Like, is that right? I'm confused.
Yeah. So in my post, I did provide a lot of details for the past supposed outbreaks, and it's all ridiculous. One of them was in 2003, where they claimed there were birds that died of bird flu, even though they were on an isolated island for like the whole winter. So there's no way for them to have gotten any sort of bird flu. But here in the United States, there were 3 dairy workers, 3 in different states, Texas, Michigan, I believe the other one, Iowa or something like that. And mind you, America has over 100,000 dairy workers and hundreds upon hundreds of dairy farms. So you only had 3 workers test positive with a PCR. 3 of them had conjunctivitis, also known as eye inflammation or pink eye. And that's it. That's it, literally. And one of them actually tested negative for a nasal swab. So they had to retest their eye and got a positive. So really, there's no real cause for concern. Even the case out of Texas, the Texas Ministry of Health actually said, yeah, human-to-human transmission or whatnot is extremely rare. There's no real public worry here. It's just 3 people that had pink eye. And we don't even know why. I mean, again, in farms, you do have a potential for using chemicals and being exposed to feces and we're putting dirt in your eye, but they're not looking at those environmental factors.
So from your tone, Jacob, I can tell that you're skeptical. I am too. I get it. But certain nations are taking this very seriously. If I'm not mistaken, in Australia, there have been some kind of lockdowns and issues with their farming. Do you know anything about that, or are you just focused on the U.S.?
I've looked into the reports out of Australia. In my post, I focused more on Europe because it was really, and especially in the early thousands, there's a lot of things in Europe. They were locking towns down, locking away supermarkets, keeping people in their homes. The military got involved. Police authorities got involved. Literally COVID all over again, lock things down and control where people get their foods. So yeah, people and obviously the governments are going to freak out because again, it's the playbook. That's what they did with COVID. That's what they did with HIV. So what they'll do is, again, maybe 1 or 2 chickens may get sick. They kill 47 million chickens and then claim the bird flu is killing these chickens. But when you look closely to the report, all of them were not killed by bird flu. They were killed by gassing or chopping off their heads or whatnot. And then they perpetuate this whole freaky pandemic when it was never there in the first place.
Did you say 47 million chickens?
Yes. One Iowa farm had literally 1 positive case and 4 million chickens were slaughtered as a result. In the United States, since 2022, you had 92.3 million chickens have been murdered because of a nearby case of bird flu. And in Texas, I believe this recent case, they were wild birds. They weren't even the birds in the farm. They were wild birds that had tested positive that were dead on the farm. And they tested them and then, yeah. It's really ridiculous when you think about it.
And so what is this doing to our food supply?
The more I've learned about terrain and the more I've learned about healthy food, really your health is predicated on the quality of the food that you eat. So if you are going to your local farm, to your local butcher, to your local raw milk farm, you're getting quality, real food, your health is no longer reliant on the system that they want you to rely on. The pharmaceutical system, which is in cahoots with the Food and Drug Administration, obviously the food system, the food pyramid and all that. They want you to eat the food that they make because it makes you sick. So it goes back to what I said in the beginning. If they can control the food supply to literally scare you away from eating chickens, to scare you away from eating grass-fed beef or raw milk, you then will rely on what they provide as a solution. Now you are a customer, which is why everyone will call the farmer people, the far right people that like to eat, real food, conspiracy theorists, because you're not relying on the system, right? I'm not political. I like to eat real food. That doesn't mean I'm some dangerous conspiracy theorist. It just means that I like to rely on me for my own health, but they don't like you're not a product of the system. That's all it is. It's all profit, really. It's all profit driven.
They're not giving thought to anybody's health. There's a concern with the bottom line, fattening the pockets, basically.
Exactly. And what did Klaus Schwab said a couple of years ago? You'll own nothing and be happy. That also has to do with your food. You're not going to be able to grow your own food. You're not going to be able to run your farms. I'm actually going to be interviewing my raw milk farmer in a couple of weeks. But when I talk to them, it's tough on them. The things that they have to go through and the legal loopholes and all the testing they have to do is getting harder and harder for farms to survive. And that's by design.
Coming up, Jacob goes over literature that indicates no pathogenicity, and he explains why the PCR test is actually unreliable to diagnose anything.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Sacred hunting. Learn how to hunt, even if you've never fired a rifle. Develop intimacy with nature, connection with food, confidence in yourself, all through sacred hunting. Sacred hunting retreats are designed to facilitate personal growth and a deeper appreciation for the natural world around us. A weekend experience includes plant medicine rituals and Native American components like a sweat lodge that makes it an opportunity to explore who you are on a profound level, something of a rite of passage. One recent attendee, Mallory Jack, said, "I thought I was going to hunt animals, but I actually went on a hunt for my soul. I left my sacred hunting experience with a crystal clear picture of my vision and mission in life." And another attendee, Sky King, said, I wanted a greater connection to the land and a deeper understanding of the responsibility of taking a life to feed your family. I felt supported and guided through the seriousness of this action. It was done with reverence and respect. Do you want to learn more? Go to sacredhunting.com to fill out the application and set up an exploratory call. There are only 6 spots for each hunt, so go to sacredhunting.com today, and you can save $250 off the entire experience just by mentioning the Wise Traditions podcast. Again, that's sacredhunting.com, and remember to mention the podcast for a discount. And Paleo Valley. If you avoid meat for environmental reasons, you're going to love Paleo Valley's grass-fed and finished beef sticks. Every time you enjoy one of these beef sticks, you can feel confident that you're doing your part to put an end to inhumane factory farms that negatively impact the environment. Instead, the beef included in Paleo Valley beef sticks come from small, American-owned farms that practice rotational grazing, where farmers rotate the pastures in which their cows graze, so they aren't feeding on the same soil forever, depleting its nutrients. This means that these cows are grass-fed, pasture-raised, and are a part of regenerative agriculture, increasing nutrient density and putting carbon back into the soil. There are regulatory issues that allow companies to make claims like grass-fed, as long as the cows are fed grass at some point, and they can put American-made on the package if the beef is packaged in the U.S. Well, Paleo Valley can literally claim that their cows are 100% grass-fed, and the cows are raised on American soil. The other good thing about these beef sticks is that they are amazing in terms of their nutrient density because of the fact that these cows are 100% grass-fed. True grass-fed beef contains more calcium, magnesium, potassium, zinc, phosphorus, beta-carotene, and iron than grain-fed beef. So go to paleovalley.com/wise to get 15% off your first order. Again, that's paleovalley.com/wise to receive 15% off. This is Hoda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Do you think the smaller farms are being targeted as opposed to the bigger, let's say, Tyson's or Purdue chicken operations?
Absolutely. I mean, just recently you had the Raw Milk Farm USA, they got raided. A lot of local raw milk farms are getting raided because of the belief that there is supposedly transmission there, even though bird flu is stated to not be a foodborne pathogen. And even though pasteurized milk actually has more incidents of bird flu cases, it's just hilarious, really. But they'll say, oh, pasteurization got rid of the virus. That's that and the third. It's just circular reasoning. But when you look at the outbreaks, it's all coming from factory farms. Yet all these factory farms are not being shut down. The one dairy farm that may or may not have a case, shut them down, because it's control. Because big food and big pharma are married.
Right. That's a good way to put it. So you alluded to this earlier, Jacob, but I want to go back to it. Talk to us about what's being said about the transmission of bird flu, animal to human and then human to human.
So in my post, I do go through some studies that if anyone listening wants to go, you can look at the sources yourself. But to paraphrase, there's really no proof that there is any sort of high pathogenicity between humans. So human to human transmission is virtually non-existent in the literature. Even pathogenicity from animal to animal is very, very rare. They say that there's, you can pass it with feces or whatnot, but, a cow on a farm that may or may not be sick is not going to get a chicken on the same farm sick. So there's no real proof, as I stated, no proof that there is a foodborne pathogen risk with bird flu regarding to milk or meat. Because again, this goes back to the whole PCR stuff. They're not actually testing a virus in the milk or the meat. They're finding a sequences, genetic sequences in PCR that when you amplify it enough, you're going to get a positive test. So they're not actually finding anything there. And when you look at in Texas, for instance, as I said at the beginning, with this case, the Texas Ministry of Health said, there's no real risk to the public. The World Health Organization stated that the public risk is relatively low and that any real risk would have to do with direct contact with animals. But then again, if that were the case, why are we only seeing 3 cases in dairy workers when there's supposedly a very pathogenic virus going around? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, how many farmers are there in America? There's millions of farmers, and you can only get 3? Come on.
Well, so We're going to hit in part 2 a little bit more about viruses and the PCR test and some of the issues with these things. But since you've mentioned the PCR test a couple of times, let's talk about it. It is a test that was never meant to diagnose or identify a virus. That's what I understand from the person who invented it, right?
Correct. So the method initially was to amplify genetic material, and it does that by multiplying it. So if I take a penny and then I multiply that penny, it becomes 2 pennies and then 4 pennies and then 8 pennies. So it essentially doubles with every cycle the genetic material in order to really study it better. What they did was take that method and use it as a tool to diagnose you, even though it was never meant to be used in that way. It's not even a test. It's an amplifying tool. It's like saying a little microscope to see your little fingerprint is somehow a test to see if you have a disease. It makes absolutely no sense. So they manipulated this, quote, test into making people think it means that you're sick, even though Kary Mullis, who developed the method, said it can't tell you that you're sick and it can't tell you that whatever was found in you was going to get you sick in the first place.
That's what Kary Mullis himself said. So the more you do the cycles to amplify it, let's just say to continue your illustration with the penny, the more you multiply the penny, the more pennies you're going to have.
Correct.
And that would be the positive result. And then the fewer pennies that you multiply, the fewer pennies that you have, and that would be the negative. So that's why some people say you can get the result you want. You can manipulate the test in such a way that you'll get positive outcomes, and you manipulate it in such a way that you get negative outcomes.
Correct. And Anthony Fauci in 2021, I believe, was quoted saying that anything above a 25 cycle threshold is useless. And they were using in labs 45, 50, 55 plus cycles with COVID, which is why everybody and their mother was testing positive, because the cycle threshold was so ridiculously high. And then when people started getting their little pokies, they took all the vaccinated people and started bringing down their cycle thresholds to like the 20s and 30s, even though they still led all the COVID cases. So it didn't work for them. So in the same thing with bird flu, these cows and chickens, you're looking at anywhere between 35 cycles to 65 cycles. They're going to get a positive test. It's inevitable.
And Jacob, people are still using the PCR test, I believe, because I ran into a neighbor the other day. She was wearing a mask and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have COVID." And I looked at her puzzled and I literally said, "Is that still a thing?"
Yeah, I know. It was never a thing, but it's annoying. I'm seeing it here too in New York. A lot of people, I'm testing positive. Really? Is it COVID, or is it the 55 different trails in the sky that are making you sick, or the crappy food that you're eating? I think it's the latter.
Good question. Well, so back to the bird flu, you said that there is a very negligible incidence or likelihood that any human could get it. And yet, is this why people are wearing masks? I don't know if you know, but I've seen a lot of people wearing masks on planes now and in different local public places.
I believe so. I've seen more masks. And I think it is obviously the combination of both the news mentioning COVID again. And you obviously know during the election year, everything is going to be heightened. Everything's going to be huge in the news. And then you have obviously the incidents of bird flu and COVID all together. You're going to get people that are going to put their masks on. It's inevitable. Does it help you? No, it just suffocates you slowly. But if you want to do it to feel safe, go ahead. There's no threat with bird flu to humans. There's barely a threat to bird flu with even birds. I mean, let's be real here.
The real threat may be what you were saying earlier, Jacob, that these sickly birds in these poor conditions are not contributing to our health. Nope. They're actually doing the opposite.
Exactly. And as I said, they're being fed GMO cornmeal. They're being fed waste. They literally, birds, chickens literally eat anything. So they're pooping and they're going to eat the poop. I mean, and all of that stuff, you are what you eat, right? So all of that stuff will then accumulate in their tissues. Now they're really fatty. Now they're high, and all these acids are not good for you. You're going to eat that, and now you're going to get sick from the stuff that they ate. It's a downstream thing. So how do you fix this? You give chickens what they're supposed to eat, and you treat them right, because they're animals, right? They're not humans, but they're animals. Give them what they need, and they'll be healthy. It's simple stuff.
And they can find what they need. Aren't they omnivores? Won't they find a little worm or pick out a dead raccoon?
Which is why free range is so good. You just let them do their thing. And any supplemental feed, you can give them bugs. They're going to eat bugs. They primarily eat bugs and worms and stuff, but they'll eat anything. Give them food scraps or something, not GMO garbage. It's just not going to be good for them.
Chickens eat bugs, so we don't have to.
Exactly. Is that a shirt? We should make that a shirt.
It will be a bumper sticker or a shirt for sure. Okay, so What is happening in the news? Has this died down, or are they going to keep plugging away at it in terms of maintaining the public's anxiety and shutting down farms and whatnot?
I think that their goal is to really just shut down raw milk entirely. Because I just saw a post recently on Twitter that someone had stated that an airport had made an announcement to find anyone that was nearby a farm that had a positive case of bird flu. And they had basically tried to say that they couldn't, get on a plane or whatnot because they were living near that bird flu case. So if that is true, if that anecdote is true, and they're already trying to stop people from traveling, that's how COVID started, right? So this can get really bad very quickly, which is why I made this post. I was like, yo, guys, this is all crap. Don't believe any of it. But I also, at my job, they play the news 24/7. It's annoying. But I hear bird flu maybe once every hour. I'm like, okay, they're really pushing this. It's obvious. It's getting to that point. Will it get to the point after the election where it's still a thing? We don't know. Maybe this is just more fear, but we'll see where it goes.
Well, and I get why the media is always putting forth these stories, because good news doesn't sell. They need the boy bites dog as opposed to dog bites boy. So that's why I get where they're going there. But what is happening on the world level in terms of World Health Organization and other such? What are they saying?
It's the same stuff. They haven't really made any announcement regarding like a big threat. They actually have been pretty quiet about this. The World Health Organization, as of 2017, has really stated that there's no real public risk. Same thing with the Texas Ministry of Health. Same thing with the CDC, that there's relatively no real risk. But again, those agencies answer to people. So those people that actually want to push this are going to inevitably get their little boy toys in the World Health Organization and CDC to really push this. They did it with COVID. COVID wasn't a thing until Event 201, where they did their little simulation and then got the CDC and World Health Organization to do their bidding. Guess what? If Bill Gates want to make a bird flu vaccine, he's going to make a bird flu vaccine and perpetuate this bird flu pandemic. It'll eventually happen. But as of right now, there have been no real statements of fear from those agencies yet.
Who would the bird flu vaccine be for? The birds or the people?
I think it'd be probably for both. And if they're vaccinating the birds, that's even worse for us. And I didn't even mention that. The preventative measures that these birds are given. They're given antibiotics constantly, which is destroying their microbiome and their organs, and they're given vaccinations. So who's to say that these birds aren't getting sick from the very things you're giving them as supposed medicines? It's ridiculous. So I think they'll find a way eventually to try to make a bird flu vaccine. I heard it from the grapevine. I think they'll try.
Jacob, what do you say to people who are genuinely concerned about the health and welfare of the animals, who think this is a contagious thing, the birds are catching something and it could lead to animal to human transmission? What do you say?
In all honesty, what I would say is look at the evidence for yourself and come to your own conclusion. If you truly believe that they actually found a contagious organism in the tissues of these chickens or cows or whatever, then don't eat the meat. Personally, I see no threat because the literature doesn't show a threat, because it doesn't actually establish a contagious organism is there. And if there was a real contagious organism, they wouldn't have to kill 45 million chickens because a couple of them got sick. All of them would be sick, but they're not. So that shows you right then and there's no real contagion. And if you do have a belief that there's something going on, get your meat from a local farm or get from organic, well-sourced supermarkets that provide quality meat. And then you're good, because we're only seeing this issue with factory farmed meat.
Do you know, Jacob, what they did to all of those slaughtered chickens?
They throw them out. You mean like how they killed them?
No, I mean, where did they end up?
So they have rules. So they can't feed them to humans because of the supposed bird flu, whatever, in their organs, which is not true because they're not sick. But by my knowledge, they are incinerated. They are gassed, they are all, beheaded, and they use them, whether as fertilizer or just literally just burn them. By all accounts, they burned them. They did the same thing with the bovine epidemic in England, where they took the cows that weren't even sick and they burned them alive. So that's what I believe they're doing. Every farm does something different. I know the recent owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves, he had a farm that had a supposed positive case, and they culled millions of chickens. And you can only do that really with a giant incinerator. So I would gather that that is the primary way that they're getting rid of the chickens.
And I think some people might be surprised that those of us who eat meat feel sorrow about this. But I feel like my big sorrow is yes, how they handled it, but also that no one benefited. In other words,
Nobody benefited.
when there is an animal that goes to slaughter or is processed on a farm, it's either sold for consumption or eaten there. And there's a gratitude, there's a kind of give and take. The farmer has cared for this animal and now we are receiving its life and into ourselves and it's building our bodies and so forth. And this is just one big waste.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what they want to perpetuate, this reliance on them to provide the food because there is somehow a food epidemic. There's a food shortage, right? And that's what they want you to think. They want you to think that there is a limit on meat. They want you to think that cow farts cause climate change. It's all connected in some sort of way. We limit people's reliance on the farmers and the interchange, right? Like, I love meat, but I understand if I have a well-sourced quality meat as opposed to a factory farm meat, I will benefit better. And I feel a lot better when I eat that. And I want my animals that I eat to be treated well because they are living organisms, right? They do have a semblance of feeling. So we want them to be treated with respect. Yes, I'm going to eat it, but I want it to be healthy. I mean, I think it's logical.
Yes. And I think as Sally Fallon Morell puts it, she says, we want our cattle just to have one bad day. In other words, all their days are great. Yeah. And actually, it's even debatable if the day in which they give their life is bad, because if death isn't the end, it's simply a way of nature recycling.
Yeah, and that's what nature does. Nature is all about recycling and symbiosis. Everything is connected. So you shouldn't feel bad about eating meat because it's a part of life. They eat grass, they poop in the grass grows, and it's a cycle. Mm-hmm. We should do the same thing with our animals, as long as it's obviously respectful.
Absolutely. So Jacob, what brought all of this bird flu stuff to your attention?
I saw the news report and then I saw the raw milk farm post about it. And I was like, you know what, let me just look into this. And same thing as with every supposed epidemic, it's all crap, all of it.
Well, I'm excited to talk with your colleagues, Alex Zach and Jamie Andrews, I think it is.
Yeah, Jamie Andrews, to whet everyone's appetite. What we're working on as a group is so ridiculously huge. We are essentially conducting experiments to officially disprove the whole idea of virology, which for many people may seem a little unorthodox, but when you look into it, you'll realize that there is real substance to it. So that's all I'll say.
Oh, yes. We are excited about that and can't wait to talk to them. I have one more question to pose that I always pose at the end of the show. If the listener could only do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
Man, drink raw milk. Yeah,
I love it.
Man, I mean, honestly, for real, in all honesty, I grew up with all the vaccines. I had a lot of crappy food given to me. My parents didn't know any better. But when I improved my diet, eating a lot of fermented foods, eating grass-fed meats, making sure all my food is well sourced, drinking raw milk every day, man, do I feel so much better, like significantly. And the diet is the primary way your body will use fuel, and your diet is going to be the image of your health. So I think your diet and primarily just eating single ingredient foods like raw milk is the best thing you can do, honestly.
Love it. Love it so much. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, Jacob.
Thank you very much.
Our guest today was Jacob Diaz. Follow him on Instagram at Undercover Virologist. And I am Hoda Labrador, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for today's episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a letter to the editor from the Wise Traditions Journal, Spring 2024 edition. I have been so lost the last few years, with experts saying so many different things regarding diet and health. I have found myself exhausted trying to find the right path in nutrition and health in general for my family and myself. Eat only meat because vegetables and fruit are trying to kill you. Eat only vegetables and fruit because meat is trying to kill you. Grains will kill you. Ancient grains are so valuable and nutritious. All these claims have been sucking the life and health out of me. How do I even lead my children? Worse, I have found myself at the end of it all with health issues, even though I say no to most conventional foods and have for many years now, all because of the vacillating advice out there. I think my liver, kidneys, intestines, and thyroid are all struggling. I have been eating meat for only 3 years, and before that, I was a vegetarian for 10. All this vacillating, not knowing what to do. Your simple reply in a desperate moment has given me more confidence in the Weston A. Price traditional way of eating. At least with meat in my diet, I was able to conceive. And by the way, my little guy slept through the night and his skin looks so much better. He said it's hardly itchy, Nothing has worked on this rash until we took your suggestion and rubbed it with goose fat. This is a letter from Candace from California. Candace, thank you for your testimonial. You too can write us a letter to the editor simply by writing us at info@westonaprice.org and tell us a story of your healing journey. Whatever you care to share with us on the topic of your choice, do write us. We love to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.